I'm going to introduce the members of the Global Ethical Leader Society, which are a lot of the students that you see here. Actually, the only students you see here. So GELS, or the Global Ethical Leader Society, is a student-led organization that was sponsored by the Inamori International Center of Ethics and Excellence, and we meet weekly just to discuss various ethical issues and world events. And we also try to do some events with guest speakers just so our students are able to get more of a worldview perspective. And honestly, even though we are a student organization, we try to do a lot of things that happen around the community, involve things around the country and even internationally. And our mission is really to just stimulate the growth of our student leaders here while kind of facilitating their experiential learning and providing the tools that they'll need in their future. And then I don't really think I need to do much introduction here. The Inamori Ethics Prize, all of you guys are very familiar with it, especially the students. So the Yemen War Ethics Prize, really fast, is just an annual celebration honoring some outstanding international ethical leaders whose actions and influence greatly improve and continue to help the conditions of mankind. And this upcoming one in 2021, so this year, will be September 23rd and 24th, which I will not be here for because I'll be graduating, but I will be doing my best to drive and commute back for the ceremony. So I'm very, very excited. And then without further ado, Ben, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. And I'm so excited to participate in the discussion today.
Thank you, Grace. So we're very honored to have Judge Fernández here. And a little bit about Judge Fernández. She has many, many accomplishments, but she's the first Latinx president of the International Criminal Court. She was the vice president of the Rome Conference, which established the Rome Statute, and she was part of the negotiating forum. She was co-author of the Nuremberg Declaration of Peace and Justice, and now, currently, as if that wasn't already enough, she's the current president of the Assemblies of State Parties for the Rome Statute of the ICC. So she is the top person for international justice, and we are immensely privileged to have her here. I don't know, Judge Fernández, would you like to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your role in the ICC? I also have in the next slide an overview of the ICC, that just so everyone can kind of understand what the ICC is and what they do and what crimes they prosecute.
Well, good afternoon again. I understand now you want me to speak a little bit about the ICC, what it is. Well, as you can see, I'm a little bit obsessed with the ICC because I have I have dedicated almost a big portion of my professional career to the establishment of the court. Indeed, I was in Rome, and in the Rome conference that created the court. The court, differently from other tribunals like the ad hoc tribunals who were created by the Security Council, the ad hoc tribunal for Rwanda, the ad hoc tribunal for former Yugoslavia, they were created by the Security Council of the United Nations. And the ICC was created around the same year, so the end of the Cold War in the 90s, but it was created by states as a treaty body. Before Rome, we negotiated for some 4 years in New York as part of the Sixth Committee and the Assembly of the UN. But we negotiated the terms of the treaty, and then we went to Rome and we adopted this institution. So we created the first ever permanent court of a general character. So it is, and it still is, the only general court that deals with these type of crimes, which are the same crimes that were created for the Tribunal for Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, but this time it is a treaty body and it has a general and permanent character. And of course, we all come from the ancestors in Nuremberg, which is the first tribunal that dealt with these type of crimes. Now, the issue is now that because it is a treaty body, it has a global vocation, I would say, but it is not universal yet. There's 123 state parties in the Rome Treaty, in the Rome Statute, which is a treaty of the court, and which is not bad, two-thirds of the world, but still important countries are not parties to the treaty, including the United States. And actually, the United States took a very hostile stance in the former administration, imposing even sanctions on the prosecutor of the ICC and on one high official of the ICC. And these sanctions have been revoked by the Biden administration only a few days ago. It was over Easter. So it was a great Easter gift. And we really welcomed this decision, and I welcomed this decision as the president of the Assembly of State Parties. So this is great, but of course, and of course, this is as I said in my press release, welcoming this the lifting of the sanctions. I do hope that this is a new era in a cooperative relationship with the United States, which is extremely important for us. Actually, the two last cases at the court that were finished now, that they were in two situations in Congo and in Uganda, the two suspects the accused were surrendered to the court thanks to the cooperation of the United States. So, in practical terms, it is extremely important. So, of course, there are other very important non-parties, and one of them, since you're going to be talking about the genocide of the Uyghur, is China, and and many others important states. So what does it mean for the court? Well, it means that the court, because it is a treaty body, and because it's not based on the principle of universal jurisdiction, it means that the court cannot really exercise jurisdiction on any situation that would deserve the attention of the court. This doesn't mean necessarily that the crimes are going to be left unaddressed, because they could be addressed by other tribunals, even by national systems, on the basis of universal jurisdiction maybe, but not by the court. And that is important because the court is supposed to be an incentive for others to act. So if the court cannot address the situation, then the incentive is not there. Now, at the court, I was part of the negotiations, and they were absolutely fascinating, and it would take weeks to tell you all the things that happened there. But then I was fortunate to join the court. I joined the court first at the Office of the Prosecutor. I was there for almost 4 years with the first prosecutor, when we were only 3 at the court, 3 at the Office of the Prosecutor, 3 individuals. And then, so it was really pioneer. We had to create the system, the structures. So I was there for 4 years, and then I left thinking that I was done, it was behind me, and joined again the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm a career diplomat. And then I was Director General for human rights there. But then I was nominated as a judge, and then became a judge at the court, and for 8 years, and then eventually the president of the court for the last 3 years of the institution. You said I was the first Latin American president. That is true, but also I was the first female president of the court. And that it was extremely important at the time, because there is a lot of gender issues that are addressed by the Rome Statute. It was hugely important. And actually, my 2 vice presidents were also female. So we were an entirely female presidency. And I think that really mattered for the type of values that we want to promote from the court. And then I left in March 2018. And again, I thought, well, I'm done with this court. I am going to be following these from other perspectives. But then I was nominated to be the president of the Assembly of State Parties. So in a way, it's like going back to the beginning, to the diplomatic world, where I hope to be promoting universality, more ratifications, engaging with non-parties, but also trying to get more cooperation from the court, from parties and non-parties. But also, we also hope to promote necessary reforms for the institution, because the court is a wonderful idea, something that is worth fighting for. But at the same time, well, of course, it's not perfect. There are a lot of things that need to be improved. The court needs to be strengthened. The proceedings needs to be expedited. So there are many things that need to be improved. And this is very much why I accepted this position, because we believe that in the next 3 years, this is going to be the top priority, the review of the Rome Statute system. So I hope to be helping this process. It is indeed called the review of the process. There are a lot of recommendations that have been formulated by independent experts. So now is the time to see whether we can implement these recommendations. So this is going to be very much the top priority of my mandate for the next 3 years. And in 3 years, I will step down. It is a 3 years mandate. And I swear I will not come back to any other position to the court. But of course, I will continue to follow, because I think it is a fascinating concept, how we can prevent atrocities through justice. So I will stop here because I'm taking too much of your time, but I hope this has helped you to give you an overview of the system.
No, not at all. That was a phenomenal overview, and I think it was nice to hear. I think the process, your journey within the ICC, and also what the ICC is looking to do during the remainder of your 3 years, and the challenges. One of the questions that we got, you alluded to, was before we jump into the Uyghur conflict, was your role as a woman, as the first woman of the ICC, and also with the all-female presidency. How has that shaped your role in terms of justice, also just not within the role of the court, but also ensuring gender equality just on the international stage in human rights?
I'm sorry, but your question came very, it was cut, and I didn't understand it. Can you, sorry, I'm sorry for that. Can you repeat it?
No, of course. It was kind of a two-part question. It was, how do you think having a female presidency and vice presidents helped you in your role as the ICC president? And also, what do you see as issues in the ICC can work towards working towards gender equality in other aspects of international diplomacy and human rights?
Got it. Thank you. Well, as I told you, there was a lot of things that were very important from a gender perspective that were enshrined in the Rome Statute. Many of some of the offenses that are now in the Rome Statute are there for the first time, and deal with gender issues. And you have, for the first time, you have slavery, you have enforced pregnancy. You have many issues that are related to gender violence. So the Rome Statute acknowledged already in the norms that the violence against women and gender violence in general was indeed not just a byproduct of war, as it was before, it was considered before, but indeed a weapon. So this is really very much enshrined and recognized in the Rome Statute. And also there are a number of institutional provisions in order to make sure that there is respect for gender and diversity, and that is also enough gender protection, including in the rules, in the way you can prove certain crimes. Yeah, there is also this gender perspective. So this is from the normative point of view, the institutional point of view, and also something that was very important, and it is this also the idea that you need to have equality also in the bench among judges, and to have a parity in the numbers. You have 18 judges, so ideally 9 should be women. And this is not a small thing. It's not just about numbers. It is about really making sure that you also give that you reflect the values that you are saying that you want to promote, And also to understand that also there is, if you want to have a gender perspective, you need to have gender sufficiently reflected, gender parity sufficiently reflected in those who make the decisions. And you know, the court did great in this respect. Not always. So you cannot take it for granted. But first of all, compared to other courts and tribunals, yeah, you know, the International Court of Justice, for instance, I think now they have three women only judges, and the first woman at the ICJ was elected for the first time in 1995. 50 years after its creation, you had the first woman, Rosalind Higgins, who eventually became the president of the court from the United Kingdom. So the ICC did better from the start. And actually, right now, it is a complete parity. When and the swearing-in ceremony of the newly elected judges this March, I mentioned this. I congratulated it because it was a absolute parity, 50-50, 9 women, 9 men at the bench. Now, still, this is not something that it is you need to take for granted. So, as president of the court, I push very much for to ensure that we would have sufficient women among the judges. When I left the court, there was only 1 woman left. So that's why I say it oscillates. You know, every 3 years you select 1/3 of the bench. So every 3 years you need to push for gender parity, because we are not yet at the point where you can take this for granted. You cannot take it for granted. So as a female president, and together with my 2 colleagues, we really did a lot in order to promote and to make sure that states would nominate sufficient candidates to have parity, but also, of course, to ensure parity at the court among staff, because that is also hugely important, not just the judges. And there, the numbers are not so bad, except that you have what you have in many other organizations, is that you have a lot of women in the junior positions, but then when you are going higher up to the managerial positions, then you have less women, and then parity is not there. So we try to push for that. When I left, we were trying to push also to have a gender focal point at the court, and that has been created last year. So see, everything takes time, and sometimes you start with something and then you go, and then that is followed up, and now we have this gender focal point, which is also important to deal with all kind of problems and issues at the court. Now, I do hope that the court can also give an example in other institutions. And actually, it's a big push now to have gender parity in other courts and tribunals. And there is a campaign which is called GEQUAL, and it is gender equality. And there is a specific focus in having more women judges, in particular, in not only in criminal tribunals but also in human rights tribunals, which is your question now. There is a big push because, for instance, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that is based in San Jose, there is only 1 woman at this point, Judge Odio Benito, who is the president, and my friend. She's great, but she's the only one. So she is also pushing very much from her position at the court to make sure that more women are nominated for this type of courts. That it is really almost a scandal that you have human rights courts where you don't have the parity or diversity. So I think there is a big push at this point to have gender equality in other institutions and in human rights bodies, courts and commissions. So we are not yet there, but I think we are really pushing very hard at this very moment.
It's great to hear. I think you highlighted the fact that diversity is something you have to constantly work for, and you can't take it for granted. And it's great to see that one, I think there's women in leadership, and also that there's pushes for expanding diversity, both gender equality and also other types of equality and diversity, especially racial. We're going to move on to now our next topic, which is kind of a specific 2021 and historical humanitarian issue, which is the Uyghur cultural genocide that's happening in China. And so here you can see just a quick overview of some of the major allegations and crimes that the Chinese are potentially committing. And you can see that, just for an overview, the Uyghurs are an ethnic minority in China, and the Chinese view them as high risk for what they call ethnic separatization. And as part of cultural hegemony, as part of their Communist Party's platform, is to try to re-educate them. And so they have set up re-education camps, as you can see here, about 1,200 over the past couple years, with an estimated 1 million Uyghurs that are detained there and go through what they call re-education campaigns and forced labor. And estimates show that their ethnic population has decreased over the past couple of years by 60%. They're criminalizing their religion. So Uyghurs are an Islamic subset of Islam, and as part of that, they've banned burqas, using Islamic names for children, beards, Ramadan fasting, and part of the religious eating pork and smoking cigarettes and alcohol they're selling community. And I think another big thing that I think is just not just with China, but also worldwide, is the concept of mass surveillance. So China, I think, is well known for their surveillance and closed circuit television and cameras throughout the entire country, but specifically in where they have a lot of Uyghur populations, large amounts of cameras that monitor every action, and especially with artificial intelligence now, they can easily track people, and they're also doing DNA and genetic sequencing and sampling of the entire population. And so I think it raises a lot of questions of what are um, what are what the issues around privacy, around inclusivity and human rights and freedoms. And so I just want to open up the question: is how do countries apply pressure for China to resolve this? Do we have any thoughts, and to open up for the other GELS members on their thoughts, what they've heard in the news, or what their thoughts are as how the United States and the world can respond to in a humane way to this issue?
Yeah, and like Ben said, we're now opening it up. We're kind of just going to run this like a normal GB meeting, everyone. So students, if you guys have thoughts, comments, feel free to respectfully unmute and start, conversations with everyone.
I can pose another question too, maybe to the United States, is surveillance capitalism, and what does surveillance mean even in the United States in terms of your rights? I think that's kind of tangentially off of that concept. The new Apple update, there's been a huge controversy with Facebook and tracking and ads. So it hit home. It hit home even outside of China. But I don't have any thoughts.
I mean, I think the genocide, a lot of American companies profit off of the labor in the camps that is going on. And a bunch of, from my understanding, a lot of companies release statements like, oh, we're not using, the criminal labor anymore, labor from these camps or whatever, but it's seen that the companies aren't really following up on that. So I think one thing the United States could do is maybe, in order to, I think it's horrible that you're profiting off of genocide. You should probably look into and make sure you're holding those companies accountable. Like I think Nike and Adidas and a lot of clothing companies, especially, just because I know a lot of cotton is produced in the region. So I think that's one really important thing that often gets overlooked is we shouldn't be making genocide profitable or profiting off of it.
Another kind of coming off of that is actually they do produce a lot of clothing in that region, but they also one of the biggest things is photovoltaic cells. And so solar panels worldwide, almost 80% of all solar panel photovoltaic cells are produced in that area. And so as the world looks to go climate neutral and as solar panels become cheaper, I think there's a big question of how you can transition and how if your world's definitely profiting and subsidizing the labor camps as part of that. Great point.
I think this is actually a very interesting topic because this is actually like a conversation that I've tried to have with my parents before, and they immigrated from mainland China, and a lot of their news sources are pretty strictly. I don't want to use the word propaganda, but like propaganda and news sources from the party, and so sometimes it's very hard to have this kind of talk with them because you want to make sure they know what's going on, but it's very hard if they just like completely don't believe it. And I was wondering if like any other students can speak to that, just like a difference in information equity and a difference between like speaking with people in a different generation about this particular topic because I don't really know how to broach this topic with my parents anymore because it's pretty touchy.
I can completely agree with you, Grace. That's something I was just thinking about. I did bring it up, this situation to my parents once, and I'm from Hong Kong. So there's that whole complicated situation of whether Hong Kong and China, I'm not gonna get into it, but um even with that, I mentioned it and I told my parents, I was like, "Do you know that these essentially concentration camps are happening in China?" And they were like, "No, what are you talking about? This is not real. It's the American propaganda, just trying to hate on China." And then I mentioned how there was like this massacre on a college campus in China and no one in China knows about it, but we know. And then my parents found out once they came to America, they like found out they were like, "Oh, that college massacre happened like a few miles away from us when we were in China." So I think there's a very careful line maybe our parents have to hold who are in China in the Communist Party, because I have some friends whose parents are like highly ranked in the Communist Party. And if they say something wrong, something bad could happen to them or their family members. So it's a topic I also haven't figured out how to bring up because it could get very dangerous very quickly. And I've known a lot of Asian celebrities that do business in China. Adidas spoke out about this saying, we don't support it, something like that. And then a bunch of Chinese celebrities or Korean celebrities that do work in China dropped those sponsorships because they have to prioritize their safety over supporting this message, which I think it's a very internal conflict that they must have. Because obviously, I'm pretty sure they don't support labor, forced labor, and essentially slavery, modern day slavery.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, right? Like where your information is coming from, and I think it's easy. The Tiananmen Square massacre that you were talking about, it doesn't. You can't even Google search, right? Like Google is a firewall, right? So it's not only can you not find information, but it's almost like the world is breaking down, and the internet there's like firewalls going up, right? So you can't even my dad goes and he's an engineer and there's a bunch of manufacturing plants in China, and you land in China and it's like Google doesn't work and YouTube doesn't work, Facebook, all of the things we take for granted in the United States doesn't work in China. And so when you're having these information silos, I think we've struggled with this in the United States, right? Like fake news, so to speak, right? And like what is truth? And in the post-truth era with the internet, it's easy to doctor and manipulate information to fit an agenda and it's difficult to have a conversation with someone when you can't even agree on the existence of it, let alone how to potentially solve the issue.
I
Another
mean,
question that
just a quick note. Like, I know there's Chinese social media sites and that do offer spaces to be having conversations outside of government surveillance. Like, it's not completely silent. And I mean, I specifically looked into like how LGBT people in China, you know, express their identities and, you know, manage that situation. So I would say like the increase in internet and the ability to spread information does let some people create spaces to, you know, combat like, you know, government dominance and stuff. So there's definitely two sides to it.
the questions, how, right, so the Chinese government says this is a matter of national security, right? They don't want to have...
Benjamin, I'm sorry, you've gone really soft. Can't.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it a little better?
A little
I
bit.
just took out my headphones again. I'm having issues with them. One of the things that is balanced, right, I think two justifications for this. One, the Chinese government says it's a matter of national security, and so you need to have, right, terrorists. I mean, you can label someone as a terrorist. I think it's in authoritative countries, you tend to label people that are against the people in control as terrorists, right? And it's a matter of national security. And so it justifies having mass surveillance and whatnot. So I think, how does a country balance national security with people's own privacy and rights?
Are you asking how does a country, like how does the United States do it? Or are you asking how does China does it? Because I think that there's going to be two different answers coming from two very different backgrounds and two very different ideas of what privacy actually is. So if you're I guess which, like, in what way are you asking the question from what perspective?
But can you say that again? My headphones and this microphone broke up. I did not hear what you said.
I mean, I think that you're going to have two different answers depending on what background or what cultural assumptions are being made, right? So respecting privacy is going to be different if you're talking about China than if you're talking about like what's happening, and then if you're talking about the United States. So like there's, you know, and there's going to be a difference, and there's going to be like, you know, a difference between privacy violations and genocide, right? There might be less privacy in China, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be something that we would consider a crime just because there's less of something. So I guess, how are you asking the question? From what perspective would you like to see an answer from?
Well, I think one question is privacy universal? I mean, I think I agree that there is different views of privacy. I mean, even European Union versus the United States, they have different views towards privacy. They just opened a massive antitrust to Apple. I think, right, so I think they have more privacy regulations and protections than in the United States historically. California actually has big ones in the United States that dictate U.S. policy from privacy from a text perspective. But I think, right, I think maybe one question is there even a baseline for privacy? Like, do you have, regardless of cultural differences or political differences, is there such thing as a right even to privacy, regardless of potential differences across country and culture?
I guess going off of Spencer's point, from what I was understanding, policy is so broad, and we cover that a lot in bioethics. Of if we're talking about human rights, if we're talking about constitutional rights, reproductive rights, morals, values, and then bioethics can also be like a secular branch of philosophy of secular ethics, so like a branch of that. So there's so many different ways you can go with it, especially as we've seen within the United States, just using that as an example for the country. is even with the Constitution, there's gaps and there's injustices within even the criminal justice system, which is supposed to be an overall justice program. So it gets very tricky and difficult thinking about where human rights lie, who's managing it. And then we know within a population of a population that if a certain state doesn't have a law and it's not a national law, like if we're talking about a baseline of privacy, there's different rules and regulations between states, counties, organizations, and then the private and national organization able to create and have technologies and advancements that sometimes surpass or fill a gray area where policy has not yet been formed or created. And I think it kind of goes into how China and the United States have different, obviously, political systems, because that is also sometimes a platform for individuals to express their voice and to be heard and to get their wishes successfulized, in lack of better words, or realized. I'm sorry. So there's so many different ways to go with that question, but I would think, to summarize, in my personal opinion, privacy is not necessarily, it's a moral value, but then how it's realized through legal is not always possible. So I'm not sure if I think we're all working towards that, like to see hopeful and be hopeful for that, but it gets very dicey because there's so much governmental regulation on individual rights and freedoms.
Fantastic points. One thing I just want to point out, because it connects our Inamori Ethics Prize winners through the years. So here we have Judge Fernández, who is working on these issues at the ICC and in all of her work, as you heard. And they relate back to our 2015 winner, Professor Martha Nussbaum, who has done work with the UN around what she calls the capabilities approach, which is also connected to the work of the Nobel-winning economist Amartya Sen, that talks about how things like privacy do affect quality of life to a degree that they become things that either you unlock to allow people to reach their potential, or you block, and then it is another form of oppression that keeps you from realizing your potential. So I like that language that Professor Nussbaum gives us in concert with the kind of practical work that Judge Fernández does to shape the law in the same way. Silvia, I don't know if you want to comment on that as well.
Well, indeed, this is a very fascinating debate, because you have touched upon various issues. One is whether we have or not universal values, and of course, this is a huge discussion in the human rights world, and different parts of the world see this in very different ways. The issue is which is the threshold. Because there is a point where you are talking about moral values, and then you have differences, but there is a point where you are just not it's not just about whether there is a right to privacy or not, is rather whether you are going in such an intrusion of that privacy that you are going to destroy the identity of these individuals. Because you are talking about genocide, and I was thinking, well, at what point this becomes really a crime, and an international crime? So the issue is not so much whether it's a right to privacy or not, is basically what you intend to do, and whether you are using this as a way of destroying the identity of a group or destroying the lives of a group. Because that is where really I think it is, first of all, then it becomes, I think, universally condemned. The problem is to find the right threshold. Actually, if I may go back to the Rome Statute and the negotiations there, the entire discussion was about thresholds of gravity. When you define crimes against humanity, what was the threshold? And then you go, it has to be systematic, it has to be of a general character. When then you go into genocide, you need specific intent of destroying the group. So we need to discuss here to what extent this becomes really a threshold of such an extent that then you can talk about genocide. Because and here you say, well, how do you prevent all that? And you talk about raising visibility. You talked about some kind of economic measures in order to make sure that genocide is not profitable. And you mentioned some ideas. But then, of course, you need to have the right information on the facts, because I think it was Benjamin who said, how can we discuss something if we don't even agree on what is going on? You need to agree on the facts, and that requires information. And then, of course, you are always typical defenses. Oh, but this is not an attack. They are terrorists. This is national security. We are not doing this to destroy the group, but to defend ourselves. Well, this is that you have, and I think is beyond. I think there is unanimity there that all countries use the same kind of arguments to defend themselves. The others are always terrorists. They are always defending your national security. So there is not so much about being relative, about relative values. I think this is very much what you have enshrined in national sovereignty, that each state tries to defend their actions with the same type of arguments, I would say. So in certain areas, you may really have different values, but in others, I think it's just the reaction of each state defending whatever they're doing. And that's why I like the idea of having a general court and having these treaties, because these treaties define thresholds that we should all agree. And no one is saying that genocide is right. The problem is, agreeing on the facts.
Really well said, and I think that beautifully summarizes, I think, the entire discussion of what the issues are. And I think as you looked at, as you ended with, I think how each country has their own justification for national security and whatnot. And as we look to the next topic with the Yemen War, it effectively is a proxy war, right, between multiple nations. And I think the Yemen people have suffered greatly, as you can see here, some of the numbers of that summarized not access to clean water, displaced people and refugees, lack of health services, extreme malnutrition. I don't know if you guys, I sent a bunch of videos and whatnot, but the videos and the photos coming out of Yemen are just sickening, and so it's so sad. And I think as we look to resolving conflict, right? Like, is it justified for a country to help subsidize or provide ammunitions or fight another war in another country's territory? The United States has supplied billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia for arms, and Saudi Arabia has been fighting a war partly and backing militia groups, and there's different sides of part of the conflict in there. But as part of that, there's been reports of bombings of schools and hospitals that of innocent. When you talk about war crimes, right? Like, are the people of Yemen? Yeah, it's a civil war between multiple groups that started in 2014. So I mean, we've been going in Yemen for a long time. And one other big thing, actually, the this year's prize for the international ethics was awarded to Laura Graham, who wrote a whole paper on the starvation in Yemen. And one of the big issues in Yemen is that the entire country is in conflict, and it's difficult. It's malnutrition, and access to food is very limited. And it didn't help that the port, the major shipping port in the area, has been shut down and on lockdown. So even humanitarian supplies from other countries can't make its way to the Yemen people. And humanitarian in UN carts and bringing supplies and whatnot have been attacked. And so as we look to this crisis, I think starting the question off is it ethical, and at what point does a country have the justification for fighting a proxy war in another country, because each country will say they are fighting on ethical grounds, but at what point does that outweigh the impact on the really the indigenous people of in that countries, in this case, the Yemen people.
Can I comment?
Of course, yes. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, this is a very sensitive question, but at the same time, it's highly subjective because states, especially when you talk about international law, like what the previous case that we're dealing with regards to China, their defense is national security. But this one about proxy war, it tends to share some of the same semblance of position, and in fact, the amount of players in the Yemen war just makes it even more complicated, for outsiders. And the paper that you mentioned, Laura Graham is a classmate of mine. We were in the both Yemen project together, and things like that. And it's at the same time subjective. But I believe once we start seeing the signs and the numbers that you have on the screen, that is when we have the international community must draw the line, because I think the Yemen situation is something similar to a certain extent to what happened in Rwanda, when Michael failed to act according to like a specific timeline. But I think with regards to the Yemen case, while I do not subscribe to the idea of proxy wars or things like that, or multiple players, but the region itself, we have to look at the region. The region also is a very conflicting region, if I may put that slightly. But I just feel like once we start having these issues that are exceeding now, this war not only fought only in Yemen now, because I think it's escalated, and in other parts of the regions. But once we start seeing these signs, and the subjective position of maybe say Saudi Arabia of fighting this war, with time it does not hold water anymore, and how can they stop when they keep getting support? For the Yemen factions too, how can they stop when they think that their rights and sovereignty is being challenged by foreign entities, as they tend to see it? So, but I just think holistically, once we reach at a point where it's very complicated, like it is now in Yemen, and once we start seeing the dangers of not acting, like children dying, malnutrition, food, and all of this, then it goes beyond just war. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a human rights issue. So it's a big bag of international law issues going on. But I just think maybe others might have different views. But I just think that it's time to act, definitely. But how can we act? That's the question. Thank you.
Dr. French put in the chat a nice summary of the United States funding arms. I think that even despite Congress, I think the former administration was still giving F-16 and fighter airplanes and ammunitions and whatnot to Saudi Arabia. And I think it begs the question that despite them being a Middle Eastern ally, the crimes and the atrocities they're committing, is the United States culpable for that, even though we ourselves are not the ones doing it, but we're helping. We're complicit, I think, in the fact that we're assisting in an indirect way this atrocity.
Yeah, I will just add to that. First of all, fantastic comments, and thank you all for your insights. I, as a military ethicist, I am so deeply troubled by the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia. This, the crisis in Yemen is a current urgent example, but there are other issues as well, and historically have been. And I am not myself calmed by the argument that is often put forward that because they are an ally in a difficult region that we have to overlook these things. I don't believe that's true. I believe we have other allies and we should build on those relationships. And you used a word that I think is really important here, and that is complicit. And to the degree that we continue to help prop up a regime with the kind of history that the House of Saud has, I think it's absolutely correct to say, how are we not complicit?
Going back to the original question, like my gut reaction after hearing about the Yemen crisis was we should just, throw money at it, like try to feed all the starving children and, get them the proper things necessary. But at the same time, I feel like that's more like it might be a superficial response where you're kind of not really curing the problem that's actually at hand and not fixing what caused all these responses. But at the same time, I don't think war is a solution either because it doesn't resolve the problem either. I feel like war is more made to show who's more powerful and who has more money, but it doesn't really solve the issues at hand. I was reading a book recently about this guy who tried to solve the issue of, I think it was tuberculosis in Haiti. And he noticed that the best way to go about the solution was not to just, throw money at the problem or actually think to himself what to do, but to actually ask the people there what they think the best solution was because they're actually living in that problem. So they're probably more well versed of all the issues that caused it. So just going to them and asking them and seeing them more of people who know something instead of just, oh yeah, it's above mountains, beyond mountains. Seeing them as positions of learners, as knowers and not just victims of the situation might be helpful. And then going off the last question, I think it just goes back to, something that everyone learned in preschool. If you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So even if you're just complicit, then you're not really adding anything of moral value.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I think we're part of the problem, and I think it's a really hard question to ask in order to answer. Is where do we go now? Even if we stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and stop propping up this war, how do you resolve and how do you help these people? Because it's not like you can just even the ports closed. You can it's not like you can do the roads are destroyed and distributing. It's a logistical nightmare. Even if you could somehow have all the money in the world, right? It's a extremely logistical challenge to provide the health support, to provide the food, the water, the basic needs for these people. Yet we've somehow caused in the first place. And I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I think it's something the world community needs to come together and address. Any other thoughts? Does anyone have any general questions for Judge Fernández? I have some couple that as we near the close, we can transition to just general Q&A. I have questions that have been asked previously.
George, is it regard with the Yemen or the two other issues that we have discussed? Because I have other questions, but maybe I'll save that for the Q&A.
Go ahead if you would. Yeah, we can go into open forum if you would like. I specifically added sections because I assumed you guys would have other topics that you would like to discuss, some other pressing world issues other than the two that I organized.
Okay. So my question is basically on justice itself, because I know the judge is she's quite experienced, with exemplary passion for international law, humanitarian law, and justice. So my question has to do with a common legal phrase, justice delays, justice denied. So I just want to just get that expression from a rich experience, where has she seen, the example of that? Because I know we have a lot of issues going on in our society. And for me, I come from a country that is troubled by that, Sierra Leone. I endured a 10-year civil war, and we still live with that experience to this day. So in what instances can you recall, say you have seen that really, really exemplified self-justice denied, is justice denied? Is it just a legal myth, for us all to just follow through the international justice system? So that's my first question. I have others, but I'll just leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you for this very good question. And, I come from a country, Argentina, that is also dealing after 30 years with its past. And we are still having proceedings for crimes against humanity 30 years after the event. So actually, from my experience, it's not that I recommend to delay justice, not at all. Actually, we are trying to expedite the proceedings at the court because justice really needs to be delivered on time. But at the same time, when we are talking about these type of crimes, yes, of course, you want justice as soon as possible. But I think some justice, even if it comes late, I think is still good justice. Let me give you an example. Because you mentioned Rwanda a few minutes ago. And let me recall that last year, in 2020, they arrested Mr. Kabuga, who was, after 27 years, he wanted that the tribunal had indicted him, and only 27 years later, he was arrested in Paris. So, of course, some of these colleagues or co-founders of the Radio de Mille Collines and those who were very much involved in promoting the genocide from the media, they were already convicted, but now he has been arrested. So I wouldn't say that justice delayed, justice denied. I'm very pleased that he was finally arrested, and I think this means a lot for the victims, and I think it also helps to revive what happened in Rwanda 25 years ago. So I wouldn't say that justice delayed is simply something that denies justice. No, I think when we are talking about these very difficult crimes against humanity, genocide, I think you may expect that justice may be slow, but I think it is fantastic that is happening. Only 30 years ago, impunity was absolutely the rule. Now you have some hope that there will be justice in some cases. A case that has now been, that it ended now at the court, I mentioned one of these, is it was a case of the Lord Resistance Army in Uganda. And they arrested one of the accused persons, Dominic Ongwen, 10 years after the arrest warrant against him. That was one of the first arrest warrants of the ICC, and he was only arrested 10 years later. Actually, he wasn't arrested, he surrendered because he feared for his life. And there is where the United States also was very helpful in ensuring that he would be transferred to the ICC, because there were some that didn't want to transfer him to the ICC. Now, yes, he comes late, and I know for the victims in Uganda, and I was in northern Uganda, where some of these crimes had been committed. And for the victims, of course, all these years of waiting some of them have lost hope. For some of them, justice didn't matter any longer because they have moved on, or they prefer to have some kind of reparations, financial reparations, some kind of compensations, but they were not so focused on the justice itself. But for many others, it mattered a lot. And when the trial started, and there was huge interest in the local communities, and the court had been quite good at transmitting the trials in situ from The Hague, and there was huge interest, because it was a way of addressing the harm suffered for many years by the local communities. So this is another example where justice comes quite late, but still, I would say that is much better than nothing. And I could continue giving you examples of you have to wait, but I think it is quite good. And actually, I think the fact that we have some justice at all for these international crimes, it is really one of the biggest achievements of the last 3 decades in the terms of creating a rules-based order. So I'm very much for justice, even if we have to wait.
Anyone else have any other questions? Oh, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Judge Fernandez, for being here. But I just had a question for you from your experience. So in one of my classes, we recently read an article about from Jessica Wolfendale about war crimes specifically committed by military personnel. So not just like the systematic and statewide genocides, but these like one-offs almost from people in the military. So her argument is that these one-offs don't stem from a moral failing from an individual, but are indicative that military cultures and institutions themselves at the very least allow, if not also directly justify these war crimes. So my question is, from your perspective, have you seen that it's more about or that war crimes committed by military personnel are indicative of wider institutional ethical failings? And if so, then is there either through the ICC or through something like the Rome Statute, could there be an international approach to curb those aspects of states' military cultures that allow for war crimes to happen?
Thank you for your question. Actually, indeed, of course, if there is one-off, as you say, is probably not a case that would come to the ICC, although it could come. It depends. It depends on what type of one-off you're talking about. But in principle, all crimes in principle need to be dealt with by national systems. The ICC and international tribunals are not there to replace the national systems. Now, your question is to what extent the Rome Statute and these courts can be an incentive. And indeed, I do know that in many national systems, the codification of war crimes that is contained in the Rome Statute has been extremely helpful in the national training of the military. Because this codification of war crimes, this is something that was done for the first time in a multilateral treaty, is the Rome Statute. And indeed, the codification, in particular, of war crimes in national conflicts of a non-international character, this was indeed the first time that we had something like that. So that's why I think it's very important, and we have been insisting very much from the Rome Statute system, not only the court, but the system, state parties and the others, that is extremely important for the national systems to implement the Rome Statute. To implement means to criminalize in their national codes these crimes in order to be able to prosecute them nationally, but also to understand them more. So this is a big push, and I think, and many systems have incorporated this as part of the training. Now, the ICC also has many times the staff or judges or prosecutors from the ICC are invited to participate in training around the world, and this I think is also extremely important. Training military, training police sector. So education and training is absolutely essential, and of course, national prosecutions when there is a crime. In some cases, crimes might be the result of someone really criminal. In other cases, maybe also the lack of training, the lack of education. So I do hope, and I think the tribunals have tried to participate in this type of sharing of information and training. So it could be helpful, yes. But I'm sure Shannon knows much more than I do about these things. So maybe she can tell us a little bit about this. But I think the training is extremely important.
In the interest of time, I will just say here, and we can explore this further if y'all have an interest in it. But unfortunately, the training is, as you might guess, extremely inconsistent across different types of militaries and even within different subcultures of the military in a single country. So there's a lot to unpack there. But there's some incredible work being done, not only in military ethics and people trying to create the actual PME, as it's called, which is professional military education, to make sure these messages are getting across, but also work done by groups like the NGO Geneva Call, which tries to get past, I can see you recognize the name, they try to get past some of the limitations of recognized militaries and try to get even those that are non-state actors to start introducing into their training at least some of the same principles, or at least the spirit behind the Rome Statute. So there is international movement on this, but like everything else, of course, we wish we could get it to move a bit faster and more consistently.
Thank you, Shannon, for mentioning something that is extremely important. This is the non-state actors. Because many of these the contemporary conflicts, you have a lot of things that are acts committed by non-state actors. And actually, the ICC has been prosecuted many of the non-state actors, leaders of militia, rebel groups. So these are very, very important because they are not part of the formal, maybe any kind of training or anything like that. But you need to take into account that if you want to prevent these type of crimes, you need to take this factor into account as well. How you address and how you manage to do something with non-state actors. So the ones I have just mentioned now, Law Resistance Army, they are actually non-state actors. So they don't seem to be bound, or they believe not to be bound by any of these codes. But it is already something very important that it is clear now that these crimes can be committed by both, and both can be responsible for this type of crime.
Thank you, everyone, so much. And in the interest of time, it's a little after 2, and I want to just be respectful of everyone's schedules. First, again, I want to thank Judge Fernández again so much for your time and for being so willing to answer all of our questions and hold all this dialogue with us. This is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you've made this day very special for all of us. I want to also thank all of the GELS members for being here, taking this time out of your busy day, letting us move GB to a whole nother day, and everyone just being here and participating. It's been an honor to serve on your exec board this year, and you guys have handled COVID so well and continuing to show up for GB meetings, even though they're virtual. It's honestly been such a privilege. And then I also want to thank Dr. French and Beth for, just being here, always willing to support us in everything we need, and for also donating so much of their time today. So again, I hope all of you guys have an amazing day, an amazing weekend. Stay dry for those of you who are in Cleveland. And if you guys have any other questions, I'm sure a few of the exec members, and we'll stay a little bit after. But yeah, for those of you who have to go, feel free and have a wonderful day. Thank you again, all.